Hi, I'm Scott Wolf, and I want to share with you a very rare document that was used by Disney's animators and staff in 1939. When I worked for Disney TV Animation, the artists and writers would sometimes refer to past Disney materials to help them with education or inspiration. And somebody obtained this wonderful document entitled Story Department Reference Material. And rather than throwing it out when they were done, they knew I would want it. Right, they were. I love Disney history, and I love first-hand history. That's why I cherish the conversations I've recorded with people who worked with Walt Disney. I also love old newspapers, documents, and artifacts. A document like this isn't like reading about Disney animation in a book. It doesn't say, oh, the animators used to do whatever. This is like being there. It's first-hand information that the story department used in creating classic Mickey Mouse cartoons and animated features. This gets into everything from detailed descriptions of Mickey Mouse to samples of story sketches, an example of a shooting script. There's even a transcript of a discussion between the Disney staff of how they could have improved Snow White. The entire document is 114 pages, so I'll just get into it right now. Well, actually, I'm not going to read it all. I think I'll just stick to some of the highlights. Now, this video is very different than my previous ones, and I will be reading a lot. But I just think this is fascinating Disney history, and I hope you do too. I also pulled out some old model sheets that I want to show you. When I worked in TV animation, they let me have these copies of model sheets from the 30s. Model sheets were used to let the animators see exactly how a character should look, and from all different angles, and with different expressions, like this one from Mickey from 1938. All right, so let's get into all of this. This document is entitled Story Department Reference Material, and it was revised on June 20th, 1939. They have descriptions of the main Disney characters written by Disney employees. And this first one is by Riley Thompson. Mickey is able to do any action that a human being can do, but to obtain humor in this action, you must do it as Mickey would. By this I mean he must not go about his acting with the poise and finesse of a polished actor, but rather in an amateur manner. Previous outlines have cited Mickey's role as the bandmaster in the band concert as a very outstanding job of typical good Mickey animation. The reason for this was that Mickey was a mimic. His action was a burlesque of a true conductor. He tried hard to be a professional in all of his actions, but there was always a hat coming down over his eyes, or his baton would become entangled in his long, oversized sleeves. All of these interruptions during his attempt to conduct had a tendency to add humor to what might otherwise have been straight, uninteresting animation. Mickey must no longer play the role of a straight man. He can be drawn so that he is very cute with a definite personality. By cute, I mean that the animators should take advantage of every article of clothing. If he has a hat, the type used in Brave Little Tailor, make use of it rather than just sticking it on top of his head. Let the hat react to the mood Mickey is in. If Mickey is dejected and sad, let the hat droop about his head. If there's a feather in the hat, make use of it. Let it droop too. This applies to all drapery that Mickey has on. With the new type of eyes that are now used on Mickey, you are unlimited in the number of expressions that you may use, always keeping in mind that the eye that is nearest to you should be drawn slightly larger than the others. This tends to give you perspective and roundness in his head. This applies to Mickey's feet also. If you draw the foot that is nearest to you slightly larger than the other, you create distance between the feet, which will plant Mickey more firmly on the ground. These same principles apply to every part of Mickey and are all made with the purpose of creating weight and roundness. There's also a character analysis of Donald Duck. The duck is the most versatile of all the Disney characters. Given almost any role, he will carry it off with honors. Exceptions are dumb roles and gentleman parts. He's too smart and active to play the former, and as for the latter, he just can't be bothered. He is vain, cocky, and boastful, loves to impose on other people to heckle them, but if the tables are turned, he flies into a rage. His description concludes he isn't funny in situations that do not offer a considerable amount of action or that require a great deal of dialogue. The duck's dialogue should be used sparingly because it's only funny in sound. Few people understand his words. And next is a section about writing dialogue for Donald Duck. Number 1 is, at all times keep duck dialogue down to a minimum. That certainly makes sense because it's often hard to understand Donald. Next is, When dialogue is being prepared, it's usually wise to call on Clarence Nash for consultation. Clarence was the voice of Donald. This continues, Clarence is available for this purpose, and his suggestions frequently prove helpful. S sounds, particularly where they come close together, as in seashells, present a recording problem. Such combinations usually result in too much sibilance. This result is unsuitable for production use. T's coming at the start of words are frequently lost. They probably mean THs instead of T's because it says that becomes dat. Skipping down, it says that they test Donald's dialogue on new audiences. It says, we have frequently run dialogue for a small group of girls from the inking and painting department. Their reactions to the clarity of the dialogue are far more accurate than the storyman's or other persons close to the dialogue. Isn't it amazing how much work went into just Donald's dialogue? The next page has lines of Donald's dialogue that was used from recently produced pictures that have been tested for clarity and that they know are understandable. It should be borne in mind that wherever possible, the duck action should be pantomiming the dialogue. Experience has shown that certain large words, when they are clear, often get laughs. Such words as magnificent, relaxation, stupendous, predicament, and others are suitable examples. Here's some suggestions of successful Donald Duck lines from the past. Stop jittering, will ya? You give me the jitters. A good bath, that's what you need. He'll go for this, absolutely. Hey, what's the big idea? Strategy, that's it, I'll try strategy. And there's a bunch more. Here's a few highlights I like from the Goofy character description, or the Goof as they called him. This one is by Art Babbitt. The Goof is not the type of half-wit that is to be pitied. He doesn't dribble, drool, or shriek. He's a good-natured dumbbell who thinks he's pretty smart. He laughs at his own jokes because he can't understand any others. If he's a victim of a catastrophe, he makes the best of it immediately, and his chagrin or anger melts very quickly into a broad grin. His posture is nil. His back arches the wrong way, and his little stomach protrudes. His head, stomach, and knees lead his body. His neck is quite long and scrawny. His knees sag, and his feet are large and flat. He walks on his heels, and his toes turn up. His shoulders are narrow and slope rapidly, giving the upper part of his body a thinness and making his arms seem long and heavy, though actually not drawn that way. His hands are very sensitive and expressive, and though his gestures are broad, they should still reflect the gentleman. His shoes and feet are not the traditional cartoon doe feet. His arches collapsed long ago, and his shoes should have a very definite character. He has marvelous muscular control of his fanny. He can do numerous little flourishes with it, and his fanny should be used whenever there's an opportunity to emphasize a funny position. This concludes, this little analysis has covered the Goof from top to toes, and having come to this end, I end. Now this page is entitled Use of the Gag File, and was from a talk by Hal Horne on November 9th, 1936. The gag file was a legitimate file with all kinds of reference materials for gags in their films. I hadn't heard of Hal Horne, so to show you the way that I work, I see a name like that and I start researching. I found this old newspaper clipping that explains that Hal Horne had the biggest collection of jokes in the world. It says you can drop in there most any day and see a dozen radio script writers, scenarists, cartoonists, and perhaps an after-dinner speaker or two. The collection was started in 1931 and by 1935 had more than 5 million items or gags. Although he didn't work for Disney, he was also the editor of the Mickey Mouse magazine in the 1930s. So now, understanding his gag files, the following is Hal Horne explaining to Disney employees how they can take advantage of that resource. I find this so fascinating. I hope you do too. He explains, in looking for material, look under related as well as direct headings. To look for materials on skis, look not only under skis and sports, but under appropriate countries, Norway, Sweden, Scandinavia, Siberia, Alaska. Snow gags would suggest ski gags to you. Also under polar bears and so on. Also under weather. He also says, suppose you were working up a steam shovel gag. Now a steam shovel looks like a mouth. Under mouth, you would find mouth gags, which you could adapt to steam shovels. You might apply a personal gag to the inanimate steam shovel. A doctor goes up a ladder, shoves something into the opening, and the steam shovel says, ah. Now, it appears that Walt was in this meeting, and they reprinted what Walt said as well. The cleverest of authors and humorists have to get stimulation in some way. I think anyone who objects to using the file is just kidding himself. He gets stimulation from his contacts in life or from the things he hears in the same way. Using the files is no different than going to the library and getting out all the books on a subject. Or if you're working on trailers, no different than looking at trailers. Now, I'm not quite sure why Walt singled out trailers, but later in the same section about gags, someone named Dave mentions Earl's trailer picture and asks about looking for the subject, kitchenette. There was a Mickey short called Mickey's Trailer that came out a couple years after this, and there was a kitchenette in that. So maybe that's what they're referring to. In asking about kitchenette as an example, this Dave asked about the best way to use the gags. This might be Dave Hand, who worked on many Disney animated shorts and directed Snow White. Dave asks, suppose we have 200 or 300 cards on kitchenette gags, and you say somebody at some time thought they were all funny. Would it be well to pull out 30 or 40 gags, or go through slowly on each gag and see if it can be twisted? Should it be used quickly, or a great deal of thought put on all the cards? And Hal replies, it's a matter of how you feel. Sometimes you go through and they stimulate you, and other times don't give you a thought. So Dave asks, wouldn't you be overlooking a lot of gags if you passed through quickly? Hal explains that you ought to take all the gags under that classification, sit down and bat them back and forth. You might read 10 or 15 of them and say, well, it's no good, and get discouraged, and the 16th will be just what you want. Walt jumps in and clarifies a bit. You read them and digest them for the stimulation. There's a tendency on the part of some of you to try to find something you can use instead of using them as a stimulant. Following Hal's lecture is a list to act as an aid in originating and developing plots, gags, situations, etc. Imagine that you're a cartoon story man and you're trying to come up with an idea. You're given this list of picturesque locales. You just read through it, and like Walt said, you just might find something that stimulates you. This list has a board ship, airplane hangars, air races, anarchist's den, aristocratic homes, army barracks, army reservations, artist studios, auction rooms, auto camp, auto show, aviation fields, and that's just the A's. Here's things to be desired or achieved. It says there are only 3 things that could be desired by any character. They are possession, relief, and revenge for self or loved one. Then they give examples for each. Like in possession, there's a sweetheart's love, money, jewels, estates, esteem of others, etc. There's a list of relief from danger of or from. There's a list of revenge against, like an enemy, a defrauder, a prosecutor, an intruder. There's obstacles to achievements, means toward achievement, climactic twists, and a lot more. This next one has suggested occupations and professions. You could definitely see how some of these might really inspire a story or gag. If you're thinking of a character and it needs an occupation, maybe you didn't think of things like an accordion maker, acrobat, axe grinder, bacteriologist, candy maker and dipper. Then there are just pages and pages more of all categories, toys and games, tools and hardware, sporting equipment, etc. It ends with pastries and desserts. These are all just lists for inspiration. Then there's a description of story sketches here with a couple examples. It says that these examples are a type of sketch. The rough, quick sketch drawn to portray and explain pictorially the idea being offered by the storyman. And then it also says if the idea is accepted and approved in its rough state, a finished sketch is made at a later date for use on the storyboards. Now, here's one example that they give. It says Pluto looks eye to eye at fish. Then fish rolls over and Pluto's head follows fish around. Now this one is an initial rough sketch, but then this next one shows a more cleaned up version of it. This is from Mickey's Parrot, and these 2 sketches became this. And here's another one. Penguin cries, a tear falls in the snow, and starts a snowball. And here's a more cleaned up version of that one. This one is from Polar Trappers, and it became this. Two simple sketches tell a story. I love that. Next is a detailed description of the construction of a Leica story reel. A Leica story reel is one of the earliest pieces of film in the animation process. It takes early story sketches, it puts them together to be viewed on film, and to start to get an idea for the timing and continuity, and to basically see if it works or needs something more or something less. The name is derived from the Leica brand cameras that were used. This goes into great detail, so I'm not going to read it all, but it's pretty fascinating. It says to make each drawing direct and picture the action clearly with only the drawings necessary to tell the story. The results should be well staged to establish locale, mood, and action. It says that the Leica reel is not only serving as a continuity force, but also as an inspirational means to those persons who are attempting to build the story or sequence. Sketches to be included in the loop are selected from the storyboard with the thought in mind that the minimum length which one drawing may be held on the screen is 16 frames. So this is quite different from animation, where every frame of the 24 frames per second is a new movement. It says the negative test is sent out for a print to be used in the Leica loop. That's certainly a reminder that this was before the digital age. They had the film negative and couldn't just film a test and watch it. It had to be developed first. There's a note that I find interesting, which is that final animation timing in many instances will make the Leica reel seem slow. Therefore, the timing of the Leica reel should be for the presentation of the story. I imagine this means let's say you're watching that snowball from the penguin sketch and the snowball just rolls and grows. In animation, you follow the snowball all the way down the hill and it's interesting to watch it grow. But when you're just dealing with story sketches, watching a single static sketch of the snowball rolling for that entire time, I could see why that would seem slow and take away from the ability to view the story and see how it works. The next section is all about staging, and it's from an October 13th, 1938 class conducted by Dave Hand. This is so fascinating to me on its own that I'm going to save it for another video, but it's a transcript of the Disney staff and what they could have done to improve Snow White, and what they could do to improve Pinocchio, which they were working on at that time. The last thing in here is a few pages from a shooting script for the Donald Duck cartoon short entitled Officer Duck. Take a look at this.
Calling Officer Duck. Calling Officer Duck. Officer Duck. Wake up! Yes, sir! Go to 817 Gas House Gardens. Pick up Tiny Tom. Bring him in, dead or alive. That is all. Okay, Chief. Tiny Tom. Another fella. Boy, this is a set.
Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this rare glimpse into Disney in the 1930s.